Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. We have a troubling economy that apparently we seem to be pulling ourselves out of, but that doesn't help the millions of people who have found themselves saddled with debt. But then again, hasn't that been the story since the history of time? People being able to make an earning, but then overextending themselves by thinking that they need things or want things that maybe they don't need or want? Or what about those people that face the tragic consequences, for instance, here in the United States with the troubling mounting medical debt? After all, we can't help when things like that happen. Well, what do we do once we find ourselves in a situation like that? Do we go to those credit counseling places that promise to reduce our debt by at least half to 75%? What is it can we do? Is there a way out? Especially as we're approaching 50, 60, 70 years old. That can be a troubling thing for us to find ourselves in. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who did just that. His book is Under the Hood, and that's better than being tied with the mob. And our guest today is Max Ames, and I'd like to welcome Max to our program today. Max, how are you doing this afternoon?
Hi, Daniel. Doing very well. How about you?
I'm doing well. I found it kind of interesting that you have the title Under the Hood instead of Tied to the Mob, I think, but sometimes you can find the relationship here. Now, let's talk about your experience here and why you wrote the book Under the Hood.
Yes, thanks. Under the Hood is a book about debt, but it's not just about debt. It's about the people who may be involved in debt, and then I suppose the reasons people might be involved in debt, because it's no doubt that everybody listening today will know somebody who's struggling at this very moment. As you said, they may have medical debt, they may have had a relationship breakdown, and sometimes that even ends in divorce. They might have students whose loans might be kicking in. Some people habitually go into debt. They do that just through the nature of their behavior. Mm-hmm. Other people aren't doing anything more than just spending that little bit beyond their means. And others, as you say, in this unprecedented time of economic crisis, people have lost their jobs. They've seen falls in values of the retirement income due to the world financial crisis. And the thing is about debt. Debt, in nearly every case, happens by stealth. And many of the people right now listening who might believe that they are simply a victim of circumstances might be in that position. But what all those people have in common is that they're part of the solution. In fact, they are the solution. They don't realize that they have it in their hands to get themselves out of debt. And Under the Hood, the first part in a series of books that I'm writing, is the first step in understanding how to get control.
Now, it's interesting, Max, that you bring up that it sounds to me like there are particular behaviors tied into the people who actually go into debt. And what's interesting about that statement is that it was about 9 years ago, there was a guy that I interviewed who was a multimillionaire out of Arizona. And he said something, and I never followed it up with the right question because it gave me such curiosity, but now I began to understand what he meant when he said what he said, and that is this. He says, let's take a look at this. He says, we can take all the money in the world, all of it, just bring it all together, all in one big pile. We can distribute it all equally, and a year later, the same people who were rich will be rich again, and the same people who were broken in debt will be broken in debt again. And I didn't understand that at first, but now I'm starting to understand, or at least over the last couple of years of doing our program, why what he said is so true. Can you explain that?
Yes, and some of us have to learn that lesson the hard way.
Some of us learn it the really hard way, yeah.
Boy, oh boy. I think the thing is that you can get out of debt once you recognize that you have to change your thinking, change your behavior, or nearly always both. Now, the assumptions that I ask people to make in Under the Hood are these. Number one, you need to be able to assume that the situation is actually in your hands. You need to really start to believe that you're capable of solving the situation. What I mean by that is exactly as you say. We hand out $500 to everyone in the stadium. People start to spend, but they don't have financial education. Mm-hmm. And they end up in a place where they get caught off guard. They don't really see that they're capable of using that behavior and that thinking that was behind that behavior to take themselves out of that situation. Mm-hmm. And the next thing is that you have to adopt the assumption that somehow, if you're in debt, you're part of the problem. In other words, on some level, the problem exists because of your thinking or your behavior. Mm-hmm. And this is what this man in Arizona was talking about. Mm-hmm. Our thinking predetermines, not just with money, our behavior in life. And I think the third thing is that somehow people in a situation of struggle have to buy into the idea that no matter what the struggle is, no matter how sky-high the problem may seem, no matter who they are, no matter what caused the situation, they can be part of the solution. And what I mean by this is we've all got to empower ourselves by seeing that the problem exists despite the fact that we've got divorced or our pension fund fell to half its value, etc. So this man was telling something that I unfortunately learned to be true. Mm-hmm. And as you may have been told, I had to learn the hard lesson twice.
Oh, twice.
The second time much more than the first. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to let our listeners know, from what I understand, is that you were a student, an architect who actually moved from the United States to Great Britain and found yourself about $100,000 or pounds, whatever the case may be, in debt. And a lot of people look at that and they'd say, that's just kind of incredible. But I know I was searching through the Daily Journal of Commerce in the local area here, and I was looking at tax liens. And, there's, of course, employee withholding, and then, of course, there's income. And it was staggering just on taxes alone to find out how many personal debts were right in the $100,000 range just based on taxes that are owed. God forbid what they should be straddled with next. How would you talk to those particular kind of people when it comes to your book, Under the Hood?
Well, I think what provides me the ability to talk about this in a knowing way is both my background and my experience. In terms of background, I didn't understand myself very well. Mm-hmm. As you said, I grew up in the States, moved over to the UK. I was expecting to stay 6 months. It's been 20 years so far. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know myself, and all of my sort of mental baggage I brought in the suitcase with me. I didn't understand my thinking, my behavior, and how it predetermined who I was. My background was part of the problem. I'm not saying it's about my parents or what they did or didn't teach me, but it's what I taught myself to believe. Mm-hmm. In terms of experience as a psychotherapist, I was then able to go back years later and look at why I got into debt once, and then having arrived at a whole series of strategies, I applied them, they worked very well. I was right back within a few years to the same place I had been, and in fact, many, many times worse. $100,000 or 100,000 pounds, no matter how you slice it, that's pretty severe.
Right.
And it was as a psychotherapist that I was able to go back and look and say, it's not just strategy that a person needs. A person needs psychology and strategy. And in my case, the psychology had to go back to that place of saying, I believe I'm part of the solution. I actually chose to believe that I was part of the problem, and for a lot of people, that's a very difficult thing to square up to. And even in my case, I chose to believe that I could solve the problem no matter what. Mm-hmm.
I know that we had an author who was on our program a couple of years ago out of Australia who, like you, was actually $100,000 in debt. And she wrote a book, How to Be Wildly Wealthy Fast, and found herself in a period of 5 years actually pulling out of that debt and becoming a multi-millionaire. So when you talk about actually becoming the solution, it really is interesting when you listen to how people talk, especially those that could be friends, relatives, whatever the case is, who are in debt, and they take that victim role like, well, this happened because of this. you know? But,
Yeah.
okay, so you're in this situation. What are you doing about it?
Yes, I mean, in my example, there was a very specific turning point. One Friday came along and I couldn't pay the rent.
That'll motivate somebody.
That motivated me sharpish. What I have to say is that at that point in my life and in my circumstances, I blamed my company. This was in the late 80s, and history is repeating itself. I was working in a firm where, in order to keep things afloat, I was using overtime pay. Now, what happens in a recession? Companies, in order to survive, they shrink in size, they shrink their employee teams, and they do things like cutting overtime. So suddenly, because I chose to play this game of surviving by having additional income and counting on it and factoring it into the equation, I was really caught with my shorts down when that sort of additional bit of money that was coming my way got withdrawn. So yes, I suddenly had to square up to a problem that was of my own device and literally do something to keep a roof over my head.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your program, The Wealth Mechanic, you say it's a 31-day step-by-step debt elimination program that, according to you, works for everyone. Why is this?
It works for everyone so long as they're able to square up to these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the solution. I'm the problem. It doesn't matter how bad it is. You see, many people would take the option of saying, well, I know the easy way out, and I'm sure anybody listening here knows somebody who chose to do this. A lot of people will go for bankruptcy as the easy option.
Mm-hmm.
Wipe the slate clean, fresh start, and that's fine. What I'm trying to address is people who want to grow back their self-esteem, enrich their sense of who they think they are, have a sense of pride about sort of addressing this challenge. And people who hold on to a sense of, well, the easy option may be so, but statistically what is probably not a surprise to people who read the papers is that many people who decide to go the bankruptcy option end up exactly where they started, in debt again. Back to your man from Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
That's the phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
You see, if I don't believe that I'm part of the problem, then I never take ownership of the solution. And so literally, I mean, I doubt in some ways that many people listening here are over their heads to the extent that I was with the difficulties I saw. And even in my case, I was able to slowly, methodically, through the strategy, but underpinned by the psychology, take myself to a place where I believed that something could be done besides bankruptcy. And yes, I wasn't faced with maybe the sudden change of circumstances that someone might be faced with today very commonly, where they lose their job. In these times, relationships are very difficult. People get into lots of arguments. People end up getting divorced. Things change quickly. And I think maybe if people aren't willing to say, I mean, you use the word victim,
Mm-hmm.
if people aren't willing to say, I'm not going to be a victim, then they're unwilling to step up to the plate and say, there must be something I can do to turn this the other way.
Now, it's really interesting because I was taking a look at the chapters in your book, and I got a kick out of one of the phrases you use here, are you addicted to plastic crack? Let's talk about today's credit culture, because it's so interesting how people think that as we get bombarded with messages of who we are, how we should be living, and what we should have, we find that we really don't identify with what is truly meaningful for us, rather than status and material possessions, so to speak. Let's talk about that particular culture there.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think it's fair to say that every generation has its own personality. And within every generation, there are personalities that are more likely to get into debt or get into other problems than others. I think I was definitely squarely within a generation that said, I want it, and I want it now, and why can't I have it? And plastic crack, as irreverent a term that might be, sort of says it very well. I think I had my first credit card at the age of 14.
Wow.
Now, yeah.
Yeah, because I know they're getting them almost at 17 and 18 in the United States, and we actually talked about that on our program a couple of years ago, where the guest actually literally said that the banking industry is cannibalizing on the young.
Yes.
And there's such truth to what he said.
Yes, and when you go to university, often there are people signing you up for credit cards and so on. And I think that the issue is not making the assumption that this is a tool that could be a problem. Yes, because whether I'm holding a gun or a credit card, it doesn't matter. What matters is how I choose to use the tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a person that used the credit card, yes, at the age of 14, but it didn't come with a sort of health warning on the side, did it?
No, not at all.
I was able to, and I think
they give you a lot of signs on there about how unhealthy it will be if you don't pay attention to what you're doing.
Oh boy! That little wafer of plastic haunted me for years. But I can't blame the piece of plastic, and I can't blame the bank, and I can't blame my parents. And in a way, I don't want to use the word blame when I talk about myself. What I want to do is I want to talk about understanding my own psychology. What makes me tick? What makes me feel proud? What makes me feel important? What makes me feel significant? And in my case, for a long time, it was about things or experiences. Mm-hmm. What I mean by things are, as you mentioned, I was an architecture student, and I went on to become an architect. I studied in Italy, which is why I ended up in the UK, and I wanted to take beautiful photographs of everything, didn't I?
Sure.
So in order to take beautiful photographs, I have to have a pretty swish camera, don't I?
Mm-hmm.
So I went out and got one. My parents said, "What are you doing?" And I was embarrassed to notice that they had a little Instamatic camera. I had this extraordinary piece of kit that I then had to learn to use. And experiences mean that I wanted to be like my friends. And a lot of people listening will have children, teenagers, college students in the same boat. And nobody's any different. In every generation, we all want to be like our friends. But I do think that in the culture in which we live, there is a lot of pressure on younger people to be a certain thing, to have a certain set of experiences, to show themselves as a certain person. And I fell for that myself. The key thing was to take myself out of seeing myself as, let's say, a victim of marketing, mm-hmm. a victim of the bank. I could say, how dare that bank give me a credit card, a 14-year-old? But that's not the problem. That's not the issue, is it?
No.
Certainly not the solution.
Well, as I like to point out, too, and you're very adamant about what you're saying here, is it's easy to say, how dare the bank go and be so irresponsible to give a kid with no credit a credit card at the age of 14. But the point is, you personally made a conscious choice to pick up the pen, fill out the information, and send in the application, receive the credit card, use the credit card, and sign your name to the receipts. That's not the bank's fault.
I was a definite accomplice of the crime, wasn't I?
Uh-huh. Like the Don Henley song, a man will steal your money with a briefcase faster than any man with a gun ever can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I had to go back and realize many years later in order to prevent myself from doing this again and again and again. And I watch painfully some people I know doing this very thing. Is I had to go back and say, what is it about me that habitually does certain things? And that's the key. Mm-hmm. Now, under the hood is the first concept, but the fundamental concept, the essential concept. The concept that says, well, I can give you a 31-day debt elimination action plan. I can give you all kinds of strategies, tools, and techniques. But unless somebody is prepared to look at themselves in the mirror and see something very clearly, they're likely to find that their thinking and their behavior holds them back, nearly both, every time.
Right.
So anyone can get out of debt. It's those of us who choose to firstly start with that step that are able to say, I have to change something here. I have to make one small change. An example. One of the things I discovered in my journey, I had gone to all sorts of fellowship programs. You'll have read that I even went to, this is quite funny, remember I'm from California, group chanting, all sorts of things, which is also a very London thing. I tried all sorts of things, hypnosis, hypnotherapy, group work, fellowship programs, writing affirmations. But you see, what I needed to do was look in the mirror, and then I need to make one small change. The small change that I made that got me excited about getting out of debt was I had read somewhere in a book that it would make me conscious of my spending to write down with a little golf pencil stuck in my sock and a little notepad every single penny I spent every single day for a month. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of shocking and embarrassing. You know, I'm talking, how much did you spend on parking meter money? How much did you spend buying a sandwich? How much did you spend buying a can of drink downstairs at the office? And all that stuff was quite a bit of a shocker. I was totally unconscious. I wasn't able to see that I was part of the problem until that moment. And an interesting statistic that the people I work with have borne out is that just that tiny little intervention will tend to reduce people's expenditure by 10%. Just that little bit of psychology. Oh, do you know what you're doing here? Let's add it up. And at the end of the day, you think, golly, why did I take a taxi when I could have taken a bus?
Right.
Why the heck did I go buy one of those sandwiches when I could have done this? Golly, it seems crazy to have bought, in my case, architects work very hard. I reckon I had 5, 6, 7 cups of coffee a day. We know how that adds up.
Especially if you're going to a Starbucks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
But you know,
very nice coffee, but
I was going to say something too. As you began to do, and that's a very powerful suggestion. I myself have done that. I take a look at that and go, oh my goodness, you know, it's amazing, you know, that you really begin to know exactly where your money's going and say to yourself, on an emotional level, you can rate it from 1 to 5. When I spent this money on this particular thing, how did that really make me feel? And you begin to realize, and I'm sure that in your book I'm sure you talk about this, is how your emotions play a big part in how your money is directed. And when you really pay attention to emotionally how you direct it, let's say to the parking meter, for instance, there was a place that I used to work. I realized I was spending $85 a month to park in a garage. Then all of a sudden, and this was honestly based on the books by Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And he mentioned in the book, he says, okay, just getting back to the parking garage. Now all of a sudden the garage decides, we're going to go ahead and up the ante. Now it's going to cost you $125 a month. And based on Robert Kiyosaki's books, he says, why would you give a raise to an employee for doing the same job? And that's the way I viewed this parking situation. These guys aren't doing any more for me than they were at $80 or $85. Now all of a sudden they're giving themselves a big fat raise, and I'm sure they've got their justifications, but I'm not getting better service. Nobody's washing my car every day as I park. And I thought, no, I'm not going to pay that anymore. So then I found a place where I could park for free and walk a couple of extra blocks, and here I'm saving, 80 on an average of $80 to $100 a month. While I was watching other coworkers getting, they're parking on the street, it puts them close to work, but then they forget to feed the meter, which ends up getting them a parking ticket. So it just goes on and on and on, and you just realize, just like you said, that simple act of paying attention. How fulfilling is this money that I'm spending here? How much is that fulfilling me versus if I wanted to really spend it in a direction that really means something to me?
Well, that's right. And when you said your emotions play a part, I think our emotions play a part entirely. And here's what I mean by that. We've all heard the expression voting with your dollars.
Right.
And one of the things I ask people to do in Under the Hood is I take people from sticking that golf pencil in their pocket to sort of doing a chart over a month and then doing another and another and another. What we start to realize is that there is an emotional attachment to everything. So let's take parking in the garage for $85 a month. Now, if I had a choice between walking to work in the winter and driving, I think, forget it. Yeah, I don't want to walk. 6 blocks? No way.
Right.
Freezing. I get an emotional payoff for spending that money in the way I do. And maybe there's an emotional payoff for being able to park in the company parking lot as opposed to walking 3 blocks because you can park for free.
Mm-hmm.
Because it becomes a status thing, doesn't it?
Sure.
For some people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? It may not be a career move to rock into work on the bus. Yeah? or on your bicycle or in a sort of crummy car that everyone says, my gosh, you'd have thought after university he would have traded up. All those messages that we're all trying to send out to people and to ourselves. You see, one of the most difficult things for me was my situation was extreme. It took what seemed emotionally to be very drastic action. I wonder what people might think it would be like to tomorrow walk into work after having, you mentioned Starbucks, after having gone downstairs 5-6 times a day to buy a nice muffin and a Starbucks and maybe a sandwich and that sort of thing, to suddenly bring in a thermos and to suddenly make your own sandwich and to have people stop asking you to go out to lunch because, well, Max won't go. There he is with his thermos.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of fun to go downstairs with Max and stand in the line and get a coffee and buy a muffin and gossip about our boss for a few minutes and come back up to work. But now he's going to sit there with his thermos and his brown bag sandwich. Those were difficult decisions, but I became extremely self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say, fundamentally, in order to shift this stuff, whatever you do strategically after that, you firstly have to step into your part of the problem, how you're seeing yourself as part of the problem. Your thinking, in this case, my thinking and your thinking is determining our behavior. Because what do I have to shift in order to decide to bring a thermos to work instead of Starbucks? It isn't just the simple 10 minutes that it takes to, pour the coffee into the thermos as I walk out the door. It's more oh gosh, what will people say? And younger people, maybe in particular, as they're leaving college and entering the workforce, are acutely aware of those kinds of things, as was I.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I still am, but I'm doing something different with it. You see, what happens as we get older is we get more comfortable in our own skin. We think we start to realize that these things don't matter so much. But boy, identity matters for a very long time, doesn't it?
Certainly does. That's why I think being in your 20s can be one of the most difficult times of your life because you're out there in the world. you're out from under your parents' wings, where you had all that security to be anybody you wanted to be, especially with their money. And you're always out there pleasing people and finding your own way, and it's amazing, just kind of what a path that can take people on.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to go back to my 20s. No way. I think I like myself a lot more than I did. I wouldn't guess there is a person listening right now who doesn't feel the same way. The whole purpose of getting older, I think, is wisdom. Mm-hmm. And much of wisdom is saying, I like myself. Mm-hmm. So many of the problems I created in my life, I actually was the solution. I just didn't know it. Mm-hmm. I could have done something. There's a very interesting story when we talk about making that very first step to prove that anybody can do something about the situation they're in. Is I don't know if this is a true story or not. We see it on the internet and people talk about it and talks a lot. Is the American Airlines needed to cut costs, and they decided, what could we do to maintain the quality of people's experience? Because my argument and what I write about a lot is that much of what we're buying when we pull out our wallet is we're buying experiences. So American Airlines said, how do we provide the same kind of experience to people who are using our airline and still do what we have to do to make some cost cutting? And what they did, I don't know if you know about this, is in the economy class flights, they removed one olive from the salad, and that saved $40,000 a year.
Wow.
Now, the question I would ask everyone listening is, where is your olive? Where's the olive in your life?
Mm-hmm. I know when you use the example, as you did earlier, about the idea of Starbucks, there was a story I read about a lady who was going to Starbucks every day, getting the coffee, getting the muffin, and it was about $7 a day she was spending 5 days a week on the way to work. And she realized, that as she took a look at what she was actually spending there, that she, A, wasn't really enjoying the Starbucks coffee and the muffin, because she realized how much she was spending. So she began to take that, call it an addiction, if you will, and she says, what I'm going to do is use it as a reward. And I'm going to save the money that I would have actually spent on this in the first place. And she realized that she was able to go and do things after a while that she had always wanted to do. And the fact is that she began to enjoy, the Starbucks coffee and the muffin, because she was only doing it once a week as a reward for her fitting in and actually working toward and achieving her goals.
That's right. I'm a psychotherapist who works not only with people who have debt issues, but other issues as well, other situations where they're trying to find themselves in some way. And I'm a very strong believer in setting up reward systems. I very much encourage people to step out of their comfort zone, because when we step out of our comfort zone in one area, we tend to, by default, have the ability to step out of our comfort zone in other areas. And it's very easy to encourage people on a debt program, a debt reduction program, to say, okay, let's say that these Starbucks coffees don't mean that much to you at this point. What would mean something to you? Oh, golly, because I never seem to have any money at the weekend, I used to go to the cinema all the time. I love it. Mm-hmm. I get popcorn. I stay for 2 films, but I haven't done it in years. So we reallocate. We say, okay, that feels like it would be a reward. That feels like, the 7 or 8 coffees that you're having a day could easily add up to that with some pocket change left. Mm-hmm. And so my concept of a spending plan is really, you see, a lot of people get hung up on the B word. Do you know what the B word is?
Buying?
Budget.
Budget,
yeah.
Okay, sure.
Buying, yeah. Buying without being aware is not having a budget. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people get hung up on budgets and think, just the idea. Feels like eating tin sardines. Don't want to go there.
Right.
And so what I encourage people to do is to do something different actually the complete reverse, because it's our thinking that either holds us back or takes us forward. So I ask people to be part of the solution and do what I call a spending plan. Some people call it a money map. And that sort of says, actually, let's take a scenario like this. There are people out there who'd like to lose weight, but somehow it doesn't happen. Yeah? Maybe the problem got overwhelming. Again, the same idea. The problem can become overwhelming and you feel like you can't be part of the solution. So let's say somebody is a little bit overweight and they want to be part of the solution. We could say, okay, it's funny, I go out to lunch every single day, and on the weekends I go out to dinner a lot too. How about if I just stop all that and I use that money to join the gym, which is something I've always wanted to do, but I don't have the $80 a month, $80 a month to do it. Mm-hmm. It makes it easy. It gives us back our pride. It makes us feel like we're making choices consciously. Mm-hmm. And again, people who are starting to do that and look at their spending and allocating their spending, I always think of it as a pile of poker chips, they start to realize that, wow, I've got choices here. I can create things in my life that I didn't know I could have.
Now, as a psychotherapist, Max, have you seen pretty consistently as a person is in a particular level of debt, doesn't really matter what it is, that the reason they kind of become like a deer in the headlights when it comes to actually paying it off is they have in their mind, I can't pay off the full amount, so why pay anything at all?
I think there's very much that mindset, and I was living proof of that mindset. Mm-hmm. But I was also living proof of being able to step out of that mindset. Mm-hmm. Somehow, the expression, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Somehow we have to step out of the, oh my golly, big picture of it and say, well, this big picture, I use an expression, debt happens by stealth. Mm-hmm. In a case like that, generally speaking, the sense of overwhelm, the sense of deer in the headlights, the sense of this situation is beyond me. The problem is too big. I think I better look at something like bankruptcy. Those people aren't able to see that, well, there's a series of choices within it. There's a series of ways of thinking. There's a series of strategies. What counts is to start somewhere.
Now, it's said that in your book that you'll actually, as people use and apply what you have here in the book, Under the Hood, is that it'll literally bring creditors and banks to their knees. Why is that?
It's interesting. Some people like to think of the banks as the enemy, don't they? We talked about that earlier. It's a mindset that I encourage people to step out of. But I think at first, many people, are firmly in that mindset. Now, what's behind that mindset is the victim mentality, right? If it's because of the banks, it's not because of me. I can't be part of the solution. You talked about the deer in headlights effect. It may be a small overdraft or it may be a very big unwieldy loan. How do I address it? And when I say bring the banks to their knees, it's about having your wits about you, having confidence, having self-esteem, to be able to call up the banks and say, here's what I want, here's what I need. And there are a lot of strategies that simply involve picking up the phone and talking to a human being. Mm-hmm. We want to look at behavior. One of my behavior, see, we talk about behavior and we think behavior is doing something. But a lot of times behavior is not doing something. And I spent years letting the voicemails go to answer phone. People were calling me at night trying to chase me for money. Mm-hmm. I would just ignore them. and carry on watching television. When I eventually said, let me call these people back and see what they want, they weren't as scary as I thought they'd be.
Isn't that amazing? Nothing is ever as bad as we think it is.
Nothing. I agree with that.
Just
Nothing.
as you're a better person than you think you are, which is pretty much the core of the book Under the Hood. It's how you think.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Do you think you're a victim, or do you think you can be a victor? And some people like to think of, I can bring the banks to their knees, because it sets them up for thinking they can be a victor as opposed to a victim. And maybe if I need to step into their mindset in doing that, that's the first step. First step is belief. You see, I was terrified to answer the phone for years. I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I let the machine take the message, and I call my friends back. I was absolutely terrified. And I think it would be true for many people listening, if they are in debt, that when I got my calculator out and added everything up, it wasn't nearly so bad as I had made it out to be in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Even at $100,000, I thought it was a lot worse. I had no idea. I'd made it into a big monster in my head. That made me part of the problem, because I wasn't able to look at things and say, well, what is it really? To remove the emotion from it. You talked about it, looking at things on an emotional level. In order to move forward, I had to remove the emotion from it and look at this thing cold. And that's very good advice to anybody who's listening, who's starting to see things sneak up on them.
So, Max, could you tell us, for our listening audience as they're listening here to the Beyond 50 radio program, why don't you give a couple pieces or a couple of steps people can take today? I mean, we've talked about a few of them, so hopefully the listeners are actually paying attention. The first thing is, if you feel a little vague, pick up Under the Hood. But what can people do besides taking that action step to moving in the direction that your book tells them they can move into?
Well, I'll take a few things out of the Wealth Mechanic program. The program is the program on which Under the Hood and the other book, the very practical, strategic book, is based. Under the Hood talks about that really critical step of, if you don't get this right, if you don't get your head right, if you don't get your thinking right, forget about strategy. Okay, I believe there are 3 parts to success with this stuff: strategy, psychology, and community. So, let's talk about community a little bit. In the book, I talk about having a trusted friend or a coach that can say to you, let's, as scary as it is, let's look at this. In my case, I tried many things. In the end, it was a very lonely journey, but I did have friends along the way who would help me square up to this stuff and get that calculator in my hand. I think the first step is know your enemy. I talk about in the Wealth Mechanic program taking that shoebox that you've shoved in the closet and pulling out all those bills out of the kitchen drawer and becoming part of the solution. Opening those letters and seeing what they say. The first thing we have to do is we have to create some information out of that big mess. So for some people, if they're like me, they've squirreled away these bank statements, etc., for a long, long time. What I advise people to do as a first step, as a wake-up step, is to take a red pen and take that big mess, lay it on the living room floor, and circle all the dates. Simple as that. Circle the dates of every bit of correspondence and then put them in date order with the most recent on top. And then you start to have some useful information. then you can divide those piles into all the people you might be dealing with. It might be XYZ Bank, ABC Bank, so-and-so department store card, etc., the phone bill, the gas bill, etc. Lay them all out. Take a cold look. Take a notepad and extract the information. Take a snapshot of where things are. Now, for me, I had to do that with a friend. It was very scary. But the point is to do it. Then I advise people to take a small binder, 3-hole binder, and put this stuff that was so scary into a format where it actually starts to tell you and inform you and become part of the solution. And then the next step is to start making those phone calls. Now, we have to believe something before we can make those phone calls. I go back to those 3 fundamentals. You've got to believe that you can be part of the solution. You've got to believe that you can be part of the solution no matter how bad it is. And you've got to believe that squirreling these things away in the closet was part of the problem. And that maybe people aren't going to be very impressed by you, but you don't have to tell them. You've just got to call them up confidently, say, here's me, here I am. I'm account number blah, blah, blah. I want to talk to you. I want to square up to this thing and see what I can do. Now that's going to set people off on a journey of action, self-belief, and being part of moving forward instead of standing still or moving backwards.
I find it interesting because it seems like that when people get into a large matter of debt and they begin to ignore the credit card calls, bank calls, bill calls, as you were saying you were doing, and I think all of us have done that or are doing that because if you weren't, then you would probably be debt-free and empowered. And that is that you begin to create a series of soft emotional addictions, so you begin to direct your money in ways that make you feel that you're in control, while on the other hand, you know that you're out of control.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, let's go out to dinner tonight. You know, I feel better that I've done that, but I haven't paid attention, for instance, to my student loans. You know, let's go out and let's take a nice trip to the coast. I'll feel good in the moment, you know, as long as I don't have to think about the fact that I owe $8,000, you know, to a business for whatever business I've conducted. But in the end, what's funny about that cycle is that you don't focus on the thing that eventually as you get in the habit, it sounds like, especially in your case, as you changed the focus of how your money was being used to eliminating the debts, that you actually find that the trip to the coast is a lot more enjoyable than it was when you were actually ignoring the reason you were going there in the first place.
Oh, yeah, because as I'm driving up Highway 101, I'm a kind of a different person, aren't I? Mm-hmm. You see, I go back to that issue of self-esteem, self-belief, self-empowerment. See, if I don't have self-awareness and self-understanding, if I can't look in the mirror and say, who is that guy? Then all the strategy modules that are part of the later bits of the Wealth Mechanic program don't add up for anything, because what we're doing is we're actually subverting the practical strategies. That was certainly true for me, and I believe it would be true for anybody else. Strategy without self-awareness and self-understanding is going to put you right back where you started from. That's the premise of Under the Hood. Mm-hmm. Now, I suppose my thing was, remember, architects, yeah? My thing was neckties. And I decided that if I did a really good job on, you know, so-and-so client, you know, project, I deserved a reward. Where did I come up with that idea? And how did I file that in my head?
Right.
Did I compare that to other experiences, simpler experiences, or experiences that would mean a lot more? I mean, I still have all those neckties, but they don't really mean much to me. I think my relatedness with people in hindsight was much more important, but I didn't make the right choices then.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I can put on those beautiful neckties right now, but if I'm not the kind of person who likes myself and believes in myself, what good is that? So you're right. Choices we make to reward ourselves. You see, money is just a stack of banknotes. Here in the UK, it's kind of fun because they're all different colors. A 20 is one color, a tenner is another color, a fiver is another color. It's kind of fun, yeah? But it's really just a stack of paper. Money's always about something else. It's just a symbol. But all of us use money to create a feeling. And I suppose under the hood, in its essence, gets people to ask themselves this critical question. When you get a hold of a stack of money, what's the feeling you like to achieve out of it? It could be 100 different things. I like to help my kids. My kids are in college. I like to take my wife out to dinner. I like golfing stuff. I like to show people in the office what my status is in the office. It could be anything. But we don't ever talk about the stack of pieces of paper in our hand, do we?
Mm-hmm.
Never.
And your issues will come up when the discussion of money arises.
I beg your pardon?
I said certainly our issues, if you want to call them that, will arise when the subject of money comes up.
Oh, money's a great teaching tool.
It certainly is. It's just that it's almost as powerful as love is.
Yes.
I mean, if that weren't true, and if people said, no, that's not true, how could it be almost as powerful as love? Well, 50% divorce rate in America, most of it from financial problems. Think about it.
It's the same here. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing stuff.
Because you see, if I have a different, let's call it relationship with money, or if money causes me to experience a different feeling, if I have a different emotional response to money, my wife might say, well, when I have $100 in my handbag, this is what I can do with it. This is the experience I want to have. And the guy can say, well, this is meaningless to me. The experience I want to have is this. And so, yes, relationship difficulties do come because we're talking about different beliefs and values, and we're playing them out. And then when we see that our other half doesn't buy into our beliefs and values, we start sometimes having little secrets about how we use our money, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people do. And then it's a slippery sliding slope. It becomes a game of brinkmanship eventually. But at the end of the day, recognizing that that's a problem, naming that fact, seeing yourself within it, is the very first step. Going to one of these credit counseling services before you do that is, in my view, in my experience as just a person who is a living example of what people can do when they don't square up to this, and in my professional experience as a psychotherapist, if you don't do one before the other, it's probable that you're wasting your time.
Mm-hmm. For those of you joining us, we're talking with Max Ames, his book, Under the Hood, and finding out how we personally can empower ourselves to get ourselves out of debt and feel the freedom of what life after debt feels like. And what does that feel like for you? And as you've had people read the book and maybe give you emails, what has been the impact of your work?
Daniel, I would never go back to the life I had. I discovered myself as a person, and through this journey of learning how to get out of debt, I discovered that this sounds corny, but I really liked myself. See, there was finally someone to like. Now, I was the same person I was. But you see, when I look in the mirror now, all these years later, I see something utterly different. And that's worth having. That's worth fighting for. And anyone can have that feeling. They've just got to take that first step. I'm the solution. I'm going to believe I'm the solution, as corny or as crazy as that sounds. But I'm also part of the problem. And the situation I'm in is not insurmountable. I've just got to start somewhere.
I keep being reminded as you say that of the song by Michael Jackson, and that is The Man in the Mirror.
Yep.
You know, I'm looking at the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And that's really, it seems like, well, that seems like too simple, but it's not as simple as it, at first as it seems, but it becomes easier based on the fact that now you're creating a habit. And it's our habits that get us where we are in the first place.
Yes. 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 I think so many of us habitually get into debt and don't see the solution because we don't see the habits. You see, what is a habit but something that's become unconscious?
Mm-hmm. Which starts with a thought in the first place.
It always it sounds like I'm a broken record, but it always goes back to that same thing. How do you see yourself when you look in the mirror? What's the label you see? And it starts from there. See, a lot of stuff we get handed as a kind of cultural inheritance from our parents or from our families or from our communities. We have all kinds of funny ideas about everything, but one of the things we have really funny ideas about is money. Mm-hmm. Who do you think we are, Rockefeller? You know, that sort of thing.
As a matter of fact, what's interesting about the perception of the rich is people think, well, because they are rich or wealthy, millionaires, if you will. One interesting book on that subject, by the way, is The Millionaire Next Door. And the fact is there is a lot of wealth out there, but you just don't see it because of how people actually live and are stewards of their wealth. And a good example is, of course, Warren Buffett. Here's one of the richest guys in the world. The fact is, in his entire life, as it's been told, he has never spent more than $2,000 or $3,000 on a car because he felt the extra money he would spend on something more expensive was money lost because that was money that he could have actually invested. Now, just imagine a billionaire saying, I don't want to spend more than $3,000 on a car, and the fact is, even in my own personal experience, I've never even spent that much. I think maybe $1,500, and I've had cars that'll last me 4, 5, 6 years, great condition, looks good too, but I think of the practicality of why do I need the vehicle in the first place? It's to use it to get from point A to point B. Yet you see these young people, they'll go on a car lot. In fact, there was one I was working with some years ago. He says, do you know anybody who wants to buy my Mustang? Here's a guy who's 22, 23 years old. He's got a Mustang that's not even 2 years old on a salary, and I'm thinking to myself, what made you think you needed a car like that when you don't really make all that much money? And he says, I'm starting to realize the error that I have here, but it's because it made me feel good when I was driving it. I said, but how do you feel when that statement comes in the mail every month for $200, $300, $400 while you're driving with that top down? He says, that's why I'm wondering if anybody's willing to buy the car. So it's quite amazing, you know, how that works. Now, on the other hand, there was another friend of mine who had car payments. She made a conscious decision, said, you know what, I'm going to start walking to work because I want to buy a house. She was able to sell that car, and she walked for a while. I think she's, from what I remember, about a year ago, she says, yeah, I'm starting to look for a good used car, you know, something I can just pay off right away. She says, but I'll tell you, the decision I made was absolutely the right one because of how she feels. See, it all goes back to feeling.
Yeah. I write about somebody I worked with who I took to calling his car a wealth-ometer because his car was his identity. He was a young kid and wanted to, you know, it's you got to look the biz, Max, and yes, very much so. Does the average person like Warren Buffett see it as a set of four wheels, a tin box that takes you from place A to place B, or do a lot of people think of that car as their very identity, their calling card, the thing that rolls up before they do and makes that first impression? These are questions that we've all got to ask ourselves to be part of the change if we want to make it. And I think we talked a bit ago, Daniel, about the idea of the quick fix. Some of these quick fixes, you watch daytime television commercials and, oh, golly, jot down that phone number. If I take a quick fix and I still believe what I believe about cars and clothes and all the other things, I haven't changed a thing.
Right.
I've just got the monkey off my back for a short time. I go back to your man from Arizona. Eventually, we'd all end up back in exactly the same place. And Warren Buffett would be driving around in his cheap car, and he'd be exactly where he is now.
It's a fascinating subject. The book is Under the Hood. Our guest today, Max Ames. And can you go ahead and give out a website people can find out more about how to get a hold of the book and what you're doing?
Yes, it's my pleasure. There is some video material on the web, and that would be on wealthmechanic.com, which is the website for the program itself, the debt elimination program itself. And I think the best way for people to access the book itself is to go onto Amazon, amazon.com, and if you just type in either my name, Max Eames, E-A-M-E-S, or Under the Hood, or Wealth Mechanic, those books come up. But again, if people want to look at wealthmechanic.com, they can view the video material, they can email, they can talk to me, tell me how they experience this stuff, and I'd love to hear from people.
Well, very good. It's been a wonderful time being able to talk with you today about this, especially for people approaching midlife and beyond who find themselves in a situation they don't think they can get out of. But again, that's just the key right there. It's what you think that moves you into the direction that you want to go. And we want to thank you for being here on the Beyond 50 radio program. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Daniel. My great pleasure, too.
You bet. We also want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter, which we have all of our information, as well as on our blog where we archive our shows as well. Again, thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.